Hey, thank you for joining our partner webcast today. I'm David Hattabus, President and CEO of CC&G, and today we'll be talking with Nancy Jameson. Nancy's the Principal Analyst with the Digital Transformation Group over at Frost & Sullivan, and Brad Snedeker, Director of Innovation with Calabrio. Calabrio is a multi-year CC&G partner. We appreciate that, and thank you very much for that, and a big time leader in the contact center workforce optimization space. So today we'll be discussing ways to modernize the contact center in 2017 as we're sitting here on the cusp of a new year. We're going to cover a lot of ground: millennials, changing consumer, technology advancements, analytics, gamification, and a whole lot more. We got about a 60-minute window today, and we'll start by Nancy and Brad sharing insights, and then we'll take your questions afterwards. Let me remind you to use the question box on your screen at any time during the, click that, type in your question, we'll add it to the list. We'll get to as many as time permits. Again, we're held to a 60-minute window, so we want to respect your time and our two presenters today. So there we are. Welcome, Nancy and Brad, and thanks for taking time today. Let me turn it over to you, Nancy, to get us going.
Oh, thanks, and hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. Well, I've wanted to use this picture for a very long time because I think this really represents exactly the opposite of what we're trying to achieve in today's modern contact center. And yes, despite my really long tenure in the industry and despite the fact I really love this picture, it took a while to find one, I didn't take it myself. Anyway, I love the end of year presentations where as an analyst I get to talk about upcoming trends in the coming year, and there's so many great trend topics such as the coming of IoT, mergers and acquisitions, which we've had a lot of this year, or will this be the year of things like big data in the contact center? So there's lots of interesting things to choose from, and certainly they can all be tied back to modernizing the contact center. But I put this picture up because when I look at these agents operating a cordboard, I think of what it must have been like for the people. It must have been really fast-paced but boring and tedious, and there was nothing automated about it. So I decided to focus my discussion today much more about things you should do to modernize the contact center, really based on the people in it rather than hardware. And I really feel that development of technology needs to take into account the change in people and demographics, whether it's how to handle consumers as they age or how younger generations are changing how we handle customer service. And this really falls into three buckets: how consumers are changing, how workers are changing, and how management is changing or needs to change. So just how do we go about modernizing the contact center? Okay, so maybe boomers aren't fleeing the workplace, but gently leaving. But I think at times it feels that way. And I have to admit that I'm jealous whenever one of my friends on Facebook says they're retiring. I really do. And not because I'm going to take up golf anytime soon, but still, it would be nice. So boomers are leaving the workplace, and yes, lots of them are working longer than any generation in the past, but they are leaving. In fact, I found on Investopedia that they say they're pretty much leaving at about 10,000 a day. And this also represented a real population blip, hence the name boomers, after the post-World War II baby boom that occurred. And also we have Gen X that followed, and they represented a much smaller piece of the workforce pie, but more importantly, a significantly smaller piece of the consumer pie as well. And sadly, it's not just because there are less of them, but they just didn't start off their work and spending careers in as much of a good position as the boomers. But for now, even though the aging population definitely has different needs than younger generations, I'm really going to be focusing on the millennials and what the impact is of them in the workforce. So millennial consumers, they're really different than prior generations. Everyone knows they're the best connected generation in history, and they're very attached and very comfortable with technology and also their devices. As we know, they practically live on them and walk out into traffic while they're texting on them. So in addition to doing that, they buy goods and services, and they stay in touch on social media and networks, and they do everything from buying goods and services to accessing entertainment. And part of this is that they're much more comfortable with things like text messaging and email than interpersonal communication. And so one of the things that we found is that they like to research goods and services before they buy, and they also will compare with friends and family before they do so. And a lot of the time it's on social networks. And what our research has also shown is that they like to channel hop and use multiple channels at one at a time, or up to 3 or 4 even. So finally, they're really more interested in the product than the experience. And Frost & Sullivan's Stratocast group just did this really cool report. I love the title. It was Consumer Communication Services Armageddon, Millennials in Charge. And what it did was it broke down the consumer differences between millennials and baby boomers. And one particularly spot-on example they gave was this quote: the key to capturing share in a millennial-driven market is to pitch the experience, not the technology. Advertisements that emphasize devices and control panels are less likely to resonate with millennials than ones that feature lifestyle enhancement. Don't show an intelligent coffee pot. Show a home where the coffee is always hot and where a steaming cup is waiting on the counter as the millennial rushes off to the beach. Make technology an adventure, and the millennials will pay attention, make it a commodity, and they'll go elsewhere. And I love that statement because I think it definitely can be applied to the contact center. So one of the biggest issues that we have with the younger workforce is what earlier generations would deem as loyalty. And when I was growing up, my parents really tried to stay in one job for life, and that message coming from them was really clear. They felt being loyal to a company meant stability and a comfortable retirement, and there's that word again. But things are really, really different now. In a PwC report, Millennials at Work, they noted that there was a big difference between the 2008 report when they argued that millennials were loyal to their employer, but only as long as it suited them. And in late 2008, 75% of those that questioned thought that they would have 2 to 5 employers during their working lives. And today, that's higher at 54%. And a quarter of them expect to have 6 or more employers in their career. And they also noted in the report, of course, that there's a big difference between millennials thinking they will have multiple jobs and wanting to be job hoppers. But again, I think the message is clear here. If you build a better work environment that engenders loyalty, you really win. And millennials are starting to enter the workplace just about the time that the big initial hardware buckets had been done in contact centers. We had ACDs hanging out with PBXs, outbound dialers, recording systems, IVR. They'd already been around for about a decade at that point. And in fact, a few years into this, when they started entering, we had the big boom of businesses starting to gain presence on the web, and e-commerce started to really take off. And what happened is that really kept the industry busy. And as an industry, we quickly ran through things like multi-channel call centers to actually calling the call center a contact center. And a lot of this was driven by the consumer. For instance, when millennials started entering the workforce, they brought their channels with them. And because they were adopting things like mobile at a really brisk pace. And what this did was to create this sort of bring your own device movement. And prior to this, it was pretty common for workers to carry more than one device. I know people who had 3, they have a BlackBerry or an iPhone. And what this had a huge effect on business because it became pretty clear that their workers had a preference and they were going to bring them to work whether or not they were allowed to. And it wasn't just phones, too. It was computers. I know of one really, really big company that you all would know that had so many people. They had PCs as a standard, but they had so many people that loved Mac that they kind of created their own internal IT department. So, but this really does lead me to another point, which many on this call are probably guilty of, and that was creating shadow IT. So it wasn't just devices, it was applications as well, and workers just downloaded tons of them without IT's help or knowledge. And finally, millennials also demanded more flexibility in work. So we really saw the rise of a number of things to accommodate this, like hot desking, so that they had the flexibility of working at home, but they could also come in and plug into an office or a cube at work when they wanted to. And the same desire for flexibility, along with companies' desire to cut costs and have business agility, really helped to spur the work-at-home trend in contact centers as well. However, while the industry was really busy implementing changes and some of them directly benefited these newer workers, I feel that workers still weren't the primary focus in the contact center. And it's not that agent and supervisor happiness was entirely forgotten, but cost savings and performance management were key focal points rather than these soft targets of making employees happy. And this is something I found completely ironic in an industry that has agent churn as a top challenge and a top cost factor. So here's my number one way to modernize the contact center, and it's change your mindset. This comes before technology because really in order to adopt new technology, you have to get executive buy-in. Outmoded and dated opinions can hamper progress in any area of the business. It can be corporate fear at the top of moving applications to the cloud, or contact center managers that really are wedded to spreadsheets rather than using modern workforce management applications. But this really, really needs to change. And I think it's particularly important with the millennial workforce taking over, as flexibility and work-life balance cannot be ignored. So if you have rigid models or fixed working time, think again. And if you're running a center where you insist workers need to be there with no remote workers in sight, okay, that's a joke. Remote workers aren't in sight. But anyway, millennials really want to be able to work in the way that suits them best. And although there are no hard stats that I have found anywhere that really talk to whether or not millennials prefer to work at home rather than in office, it's being flexible when, where, and how they work that is most important in employee satisfaction. And I also keep hoping that the overall mindset that the contact center is a cost center is over. While certainly important, it's short-sighted to think that employee satisfaction should be less important because the cost of losing good employees who are unhappy at the end of the day results in cost to the business, and we know that. But here's the good news. We have tools to do this, particularly in the realm of workforce management. So we started with workforce management and spreadsheets, and as I mentioned earlier, a vast amount of contact centers still rely on them, but this is really short-sighted for numerous reasons having to do with employee satisfaction or not. I mean, just in performance management alone, a spreadsheet can't be connected to systems to track adherence. So people are really missing out if they don't investigate these. But on the agent side, it's also imperative to allow agents some control over their lives, particularly if they're millennials who value that work-life balance more than prior generations. And this is so much so that studies have shown that workers would take less pay for more flexible work schedules. And now we can do this. And part of the mindset change is that you can cede control over to the agent without it hurting. So good work management should take into account a number of things like preference management and things like allowing for flexible scheduling from hours of the day to even quarter hours, for example. So there's so many new models of ways to work, from slanting the work week to be really heavy on one end and light on the other, or the reverse, or stacking one day with more hours to give employees a half day off each week. That would be nice. Schedules can be in any shape that you want them to be. So my way number 2 is to modernize your contact center by empowering the agent. And this really dovetails with my first way, and that empowering agents often requires a change in that management mindset. I think too often customers are really left to the mercy of agents who aren't empowered to help them. They don't have the right tools, or they have too many processes and things in their way to really effectively help customers that increasingly have more complex inquiries because they will do their homework before they buy or try to self-help. So, and this showed up in the 10th Annual Customer Satisfaction Index this year that was done by CFI Group. More than 3,000 customers were surveyed about their satisfaction with contact centers. And in the survey, millennial satisfaction scores dropped to 66 points out of 100, which was a 7-point drop from last year. And it also was a widening of the gap between them and people over 45. So there's now a 4-point gap. So for customers that are used to getting information instantly, and when they hit an agent roadblock, it really can negatively impact customer satisfaction. In particular, if it takes a lot of time to resolve an issue, or the agent doesn't have the power to help them due to some procedure, and if a company puts policies in place that don't make sense to customers, then satisfaction really plummets. So this means setting a clear vision for what you want the outcome of your contact center to be, and use analytics to find spots with underperforming outcomes and walk through those to uncover areas of opportunity where a process might need to be changed. And then find those areas that are causes of escalation from agent to supervisor and create greater options for agents to solve issues without escalation. So there's inevitably going to be areas where maybe a deeper discount will be required to keep a customer happy, or a larger window for merchandise returns, or any number of things that on the surface might seem costly. But by eliminating the time and customer fatigue of involving management might actually be the opposite. Also, set policies on how to handle exceptions and give a little wiggle room so agents don't feel pressured to do everything by the book or else get, in trouble. And then back it up with analytics, my favorite, spot these outliers that too often push the window, and then train them accordingly. But remember that agents are on the front line, and exceptions to the rule might end up being new rules that make sense. So going back to something I touched on in the last slide, allowing agents to have some control over their schedule can go a long way to agents feeling empowered in their job. Dynamic scheduling, which is essentially crowdsourcing to generate schedules, lets agents automatically bid on schedules of their choosing, and then adding the flexibility to bid as a group if business rules allow for it, so that maybe agents can take time off together is even better. Just little tiny things like that can make a big difference. And this should be extended to mobile devices as well for agents and supervisors. So providing a mobile app for agents, you can give them the flexibility of checking in from home or getting critical information about work and doing all sorts of things like bidding on shifts, notifying supervisors when they're sick and can't come in, changing their schedules and other things without having to be at the center or their home computer. And also providing supervisors with the capability to run their centers while mobile really empowers them to do their jobs more easily as well. And then tap into that gaming culture. It's my thought that gamification is just going to be table stakes in the coming years and embedded into WFO products rather than an add-on option. So the nature of the app makes it really a perfect addition to the Millennial Contact Center by providing things like instant feedback and agent benchmarking and rewarding for performance, and we know everyone likes rewards. So, and it makes it feel like less like work. So number 3 is upgrading the agent desktops. Back in the mid-'80s, we had some pretty, I would say, primitive agent desktops, DOS-based screens where agents had to know how to select files from pull-down menus and all sorts of things. But now that's really, really changed. A lot has changed. So we have really elegant design thinking that is absolutely necessary to create this better agent experience. And as we know, happier, more engaged agents makes for happy customers. And I've seen a lot of desktops, and I'm just like blown away sometimes. They're easy to use. They allow for widgets to access frequently used data and other applications. They allow for customization and better visualization of data. And they don't force the agent to have to click through myriad screens to get to what they want or they need. And then, of course, we know when that happens, we get those, "I'm sorry, my computer's slow today" messages, which drives us all crazy. Also, with a modern desktop, you can allow for easier collaboration between agents with other agents or with their supervisors or even with customers. And there are a number of really cool developments that have recently occurred to really modernize the desktop and the contact center. We can now provide agents with customer journey mapping. And this gives the agent a real visual tool to really understand what's happening with the customer and where they've been and what they're struggling with and how they can more easily help them. So understanding that the customer journey is light years ahead of where we were when we just had CRM data and could see history. And being able to see where they've been and how they're progressing really empowers agents to handle interactions differently, and I think more confidently. And another one is next best action or guided resolution alongside things like robotic process automation, which is being used in the back office and sometimes alongside agents. So finally, the usage of video is slowly taking off in the contact center. Still not so much that full-fledged video contact center that we've talked about for years that portrayed in the Amazon commercials with the Mayday button, but providing video capabilities so that agents can collaborate more easily with customers or push video to show them how to do something, or even used in kiosks for branch extensions of the contact center. All of the uses of video are really well worth looking at depending upon your business needs. So, in order to reach what I like to term omnichannel customer bliss, you have to finish what you started. And for instance, I've really been a proponent of IVR since it was introduced in the late 80s. I still love it when done right, or if it's capable of doing the action the customer really called about. And the example I always give is there any quicker way to verify that you've gotten a new credit card than through an IVR? I doubt it. I truly doubt it. But poor implementations of IVR are bad. And even though we now have many self-service options, including virtual assistants, which could be considered offshoots of IVR, and the web, I've always said that you're only as good as your worst channel. So finish what you started. If you have an IVR, make sure it's up to par, including having multimodal user interfaces and speech recognition, great error recovery, and yes, CTI. We pass that information on to the agent if there's a need to do so. This has been such a pain point for decades, and I can't emphasize enough to take a look at all channels, because sadly, right when customers' preference is to self-serve first, many studies show that it's less than stellar results. But just as important is to not make IVR the roadblock to customer satisfaction. So all of our research is showing that customers are calling in less to the contact center, and when they do, it's for more complex issues in the past. So don't make it an unwieldy gatekeeper to your live agents. And this is where callback comes in. I'm seeing it more and more. It's underutilized, but callback or virtual hold is really important to customer satisfaction. It gets people off of hold, and I think it shows them that you value them as a customer, so use it. And also take advantage of the fact that the world's gone mobile. IVRs need to be updated to be mobile friendly. If people on the move don't want to listen to all those menu options, a speech user interface, and then also the ability to see greater detail on the phone screen can really influence customer satisfaction. Of course, you have to not be mobile while doing that last part, but anyway. So let's move back to millennials as consumers. And this is my way number 5. There is probably a dozen different industries represented in the audience today, and for many of your customer bases, they might be broad enough that you do need all channels of interaction, or maybe not, but you need to understand the changing dynamics of consumers and how they impact your business. And I had a couple of aha moments about thinking about the design of contact centers, and I was recently told by a sales engineer that her client, who was a poison control center, implemented SMS messaging as a channel, and at first I thought, why? You know, and why is it? Because who are the most likely people to contact poison control? New parents. They think everything's going to kill their children. I know, I had twins, and I'm fortunate I never had to call for them, but seriously, when this person told me that, I just kind of paused and thought, that's really brilliant. Talk about understanding your target audience. And understanding this means the use of analytics to slice and dice your customer base. So employ measurements that really measure customer satisfaction, not just standard metrics such as average handle time, and then understand how they're using those channels. And also employ as much personalization across these newly revamped channels as possible. And this means understanding where the customer has been and saving them time when they reconnect. So for example, going back to this IVR, if they booked an airline flight and they're calling in close to flight time, it's probably pretty likely that it has something to do with their flight. So reflect that in your IVR menus. And similarly, when you're doing an outbound message to solicit a response, put that caller at the place on the web or the IVR or with a live agent that is pertinent to that outbound message. Don't make them start over. And also just listen to your customers. One of the coolest tools out there now are voice of the customer programs, but they should be cross-channel and cross-referenced so that you get a clear picture of how the voice of the customer changes over any given period of time across multiple interactions. And they also need to be timely. So asking a customer for feedback before an issue is resolved really provides very different data than afterwards. And I had a horrible example, I'm not going to tell now, but of this week for me. And I just shook my head. And speaking of knowing your customer, to increase security and streamline the customer experience, consider using voice biometrics for authentication. This can really be done either actively or passively so that enrollment is easy. Biometrics streamlines authentication and significantly cuts down on customer frustration and the amount of time it takes to verify identity. And further, it's really a critical part of a fraud prevention and reduction toolkit. So, how can you best facilitate these changes? Move to the cloud. Cloud allows for easier integration of all of these disparate application silos, and it can also allow you to get there sooner because you can use OpEx rather than CapEx funds. So maybe you can add that channel that you wouldn't have been able to add. And it also provides you with the solution provider's latest and greatest upgrades and new features much more quickly. And if you're in that phase where you have the opportunity to replace all over the majority of your contact center, then you can reach omnichannel customer care bliss again much quicker than replacing it in a piecemeal fashion. So on that note, I've been talking for a long time fast, and so I'm going to pass the baton over to my co-presenter, Brad, for a deeper dive. And happy 2017, everyone. I hope holidays bring you great stuff. Brad?
Excellent. Thank you, Nancy. That was excellent content, and really appreciate it because it is very much in line with everything that we are uncovering at Calabrio as we do market research and, of course, talk to our clients. Everything you're saying really hits home, especially when we're talking about trying to adapt our contact center processes to deal with the new generation of folks that are coming into the workforce, and specifically adapting our performance management as well as our workforce management practices to better align with their expectations and their desires from a workplace and an employer. So with that, let's jump in and talk about some of the things from a Calabrio perspective that we feel are kind of the future of the contact center industry. And we'll start by talking about a topic that Nancy talked about as well at the beginning, which is dynamic scheduling. So Nancy hinted at this when she was talking about the shift bidding and dynamic scheduling arenas for agent engagement. And I just want to expand upon that because dynamic scheduling is a concept that we at Calabrio introduced to the market a number of years ago. And we do feel that it is really the next step for contact centers that are looking to attract that millennial generation and to retain those employees, more importantly, long term. So really the idea behind dynamic scheduling, and we actually have two different flavors of this, about what we call dynamic scheduling and dynamic availability. And we'll talk about each one of these. Dynamic scheduling is really very similar in its effect to a traditional shift bid. However, what we've really done with dynamic scheduling is we've flipped the shift bidding process on its ear. In a traditional shift bidding process, we are, as schedulers, as administrators, as supervisors, we are essentially creating a work shift. We're creating a template of start times and a number of folks that we need in each available work shift. And then we're going to our staff and saying, okay, based on your performance, based on your seniority, what work shift do you want out of these work shifts that we created for you, right? And then based on their performance, based on their seniority, they'll be assigned their first choice, second choice, third choice, depending on, again, where they are in that particular queue. So we end up with a traditional shift bid, we end up with essentially traditional work shifts, right? We end up with those Monday through Friday, 8 to 5 work shifts, 9 to 6, 10 to 7, whatever they happen to be. But we end up with these very static work shifts that are the way that workforce management has traditionally been done. But the reality with the millennial generation and people that are really, really focused heavily on work-life balance is that an 8 to 5 work shift may not necessarily work really well for everyone. 8 to 5 might work for me on Monday, but on Tuesday I might want to come in a little bit later because I have an evening class that I need to get to on Monday. Maybe I have less available childcare on Wednesday, so I want to work a little bit earlier so I can be home a little bit earlier to be with my child. Those are just some examples where an 8 to 5 work shift isn't necessarily going to work really well for that particular person. And the reality is, from a workforce perspective, from a service level perspective, there is no benefit to having agents that start the same time every day of the week. There's really no benefit to that at all. The reason that we have work shifts set up this way is because that's just the way workforce management has always been done, and it's the way we are traditionally used to looking at work shifts. So with dynamic scheduling, we give agents the ability to essentially, and again, this is based on their performance, based on their seniority, depending on what you want to select, but they can actually build their own work shifts to say, this is the work shift that works best for me. Now, dynamic availability, on the other hand, this is excellent solution for any organizations that are looking to bring on some maybe seasonal part-time workers, or even part-time workers that are there all year long, or especially effective for people that have remote employees, which again is a trend that we are seeing within the contact center world. We are seeing more and more organizations embrace those work-at-home people because they have a degree of flexibility that our brick-and-mortar representatives don't necessarily have. When we're working in a brick-and-mortar location, it makes sense for me to come in and start at one particular time, work my 9-hour day, and then go home. It doesn't make sense for me to go and leave multiple times throughout the day. But when I'm a work-at-home agent, it really does make sense for me to be able to break my work shift up into multiple chunks throughout the day. So with dynamic availability, essentially what we're asking the representative to do is to paint when they are available to work, and then essentially painting their preferences and their availability. And then based on our requirements from a workforce perspective, workforce management can actually utilize those people at the time that we need them the most. So maybe they're working a couple hours in the morning, and then a couple hours in the early afternoon, and then maybe a couple hours in the late evening, because that's what works best for their particular schedule. And it might be different on different days of the week. So the idea behind all of this, behind dynamic scheduling and dynamic availability, is that it gives your agents more control, it gives them more buy-in into the process, and it tends to decrease absenteeism, and long-term it tends to decrease turnover because you have happier employees that understand that they are a valued part of the process, and they are absolutely taken into account, and their preferences are taken into account when we are generating schedules. So from an agent engagement perspective and a workforce management perspective, we really see that techniques like this, and whether you use the Calabrio solution or you don't, but techniques like this where we're really giving our representatives the flexibility to fill time where they feel they need to work the most is a tremendous incentive and a great recruiting tool. Now, with that, let's transition and talk a little bit about things more from a technology perspective. And let's talk a little bit about, again, another topic that Nancy mentioned, which is analytics. We at Calabrio, this is really the area that we are most strongly focused from an R&D perspective, because we really do see analytics as not only something that many current contact centers are taking advantage of and utilizing, but we really see it as the technology of the future as well. There is such tremendous growth that we are able to achieve as customer service and contact center organizations through the use of analytics, that we really see essentially everyone adopting this and making it just a standard part of the contact center world. Now, when we talk about analytics, historically, when most people refer to analytics, they're talking about a very specific thing. They're a lot of times talking about speech analytics, for example, and they are also usually referring to what we at Calabrio refer to as descriptive analytics. Descriptive analytics. And by descriptive analytics, we mean looking at things that have happened in the past, describing a situation that has already occurred, right? Looking at something in the past, and then hopefully using that to gain insights, to develop some sort of a root cause analysis, and then implement some sort of an action plan. And that's how most people use analytics. That's how most contact centers utilize it that are utilizing it today. But we really see that analytics is evolving and it's changing, and we see that the technology is finally starting to catch up to give us the capabilities to do more than that and to look to the future with predictive and prescriptive analytics and with learning technologies such as cognitive analytics. What these technologies will allow us to do is, rather than just focusing on the past, we'll be able to use the information that we've gleaned from the past to predict what we expect to happen in the future, to possibly even prescribe solutions to us to problems that we may not have even recognized were issues before they actually become a problem for our customers. So it's a tremendous technology, and we really see a lot of revolutions coming in that particular arena over the next few years. Speaking specifically from a Calabrio perspective, one of the technologies that we introduced this year was our predictive call scoring, as well as our predictive Net Promoter Score. As everyone, I'm sure, is familiar with in the audience, we really, as contact center people, don't have the luxury of evaluating as many calls as we would like to, right? In a perfect world, most contact centers are trying to get to a goal where we're evaluating, say, 5 calls per agent per week. That's usually the goal that we set from a best practices perspective. However, of course, talking to contact centers in the real world, that is an aspirational goal that we many times can't meet, right? In a lot of contact centers, we're lucky to be doing 5 calls per agent per month. And in many cases, it's even less than that. So when we have such a small sample size of calls that we're evaluating and using that sample size to try to extrapolate out what we feel the way that we're servicing our customer, how we feel we're servicing our customers, it's very difficult to do. So with predictive call scoring, we're actually able to predict based on historical evaluations and categorizing those evaluations to look at these are the things that typically lead to high quality. These are the commonalities that high scoring calls have, that low scoring calls have, and everything in between. We are able to then predict for 100% of your contacts what we predict the quality score would be if we were to score that. So this gives us a much more holistic picture of how our contact center is performing overall. And we also have the same technology attached to Net Promoter Score. So we have the same capabilities to predict for 100% of your interactions what the expected Net Promoter Score would be based on a small sample of gathered Net Promoter Score data from our actual clients. And by putting these two things together, we're able to see how we are performing overall as a contact center, not only against our internal criteria, our evaluation forms, but also against our customers' expectations through the use of Net Promoter Score. And finally, one last topic I'll touch on, and again, I am copying a lot of the things that, or jumping off of a lot of things that Nancy mentioned, but gamification. In October of this year, we had our annual Customer Connect conference, which is where we bring together hundreds of our clients from across the world to get together to talk about contact center topics. And I was fortunate enough to be a lead on a couple of different panels that were focused on agent engagement and performance management. And this is something I've done for the past couple of years, and it was amazing to me, even from one year to the next, how many more clients I see really embracing gamification technology even from the year before. Almost everyone in my panels, when I asked if they were doing some sort of a gamification, raised their hand. And what was interesting is those people that didn't raise their hand, when I found out what they were actually doing some sort of a gamification. They just weren't calling it gamification, right? It's the concept of tying performance metrics to gaming stats, right? To leveling up and to earning achievements. It is amazing how motivating this can be to our staff, just by essentially allowing them to control their own destiny and earn these achievements through their own work effort. It is a tremendously motivating technology, and as Nancy mentioned, I absolutely agree with her. This is something that is just going to be a natural part of the contact center world in the very near future. We're already almost there. So if you haven't looked at some sort of a gamification technique within your contact center, and the beautiful thing about gamification is you don't need technology for this. You can base gamification on whatever metrics you want to, whether it's adherence, quality scores, customer accolades, internal shout-outs from other employees. It's very easy to implement these techniques, and they're tremendously effective at motivating our employees. And so with that, again, these are just a few of the things that we as Calabrio are focusing on. There's obviously a lot more to come, and a lot of other technology and techniques that we don't necessarily have the time to talk about today. So with that, but we have talked about a lot, so I'm sure there are some questions to come. So with that, I will go ahead and kick it back over to David to walk us through Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Brad. Yeah, great job, both of you. Appreciate the insights and perspectives. We do have a number of questions here. I'm going to kind of lead off with one that's out of the blue. There was no mention, Nancy, from you, or I don't recall from Brad, so I'll throw it at you, Nancy, a mention of chatbots. How do they fit into the mix here? How, what are they? How are they going to impact us? Can you give us some perspective there?
So that's pretty funny. I don't know why I didn't mention that one, because I just finished a report on it, on virtual assistants and chatbots, and I love them. I think that they're the wave of the future. And there's really two kinds. Well, there's many different kinds, but there's the live agent messenger apps that are coming out. And I think those are fantastic because within like Facebook Messenger and others, you can take that social media offline and make it personal and really work within the application. And what's cool about it is that rather than a person being on hold, you can leave that open. You can have a chat going on for weeks if you want to. And so I've seen a number of companies and a number of vendors come out with messaging applications. And then the other side of that is the whole virtual assistant chatbot or bots. Very confused messaging around all of them, because some of them have deep AI and machine learning and big data, and some don't. But to be able to have an automated system that will go back and forth with a customer, you can offload a lot from agents, and it also is in that. Going back to the millennials, it's in that form that they like. I think it's going to be awesome going forward.
Reminding everyone, if you're going to post a question, use that question box. I can see they're starting to pile up. I'm going to combine this next question because it really touches about something both of you talked about. I believe, Nancy, you talked about a mindset change, workforce management shifting to preference management. And Brad, you obviously spent a lot of time talking about implementing a dynamic schedule. The question reads, is there a certain size of call center that preference management would work? In an example, would call centers work with a staff of less than 100? Would it be feasible? So, Brad, why don't you tackle it first, then Nancy?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as far as the low end of this, I really haven't found a contact center based on their size that couldn't take advantage of some sort of a dynamic scheduling methodology, at least for a small, at the very least, for a small group of your agents. The key thing is to look at your particular workforce and make sure that dynamic scheduling is a good fit for your particular environment. And as I talked about, if we have that type of millennial folks within our contact center, especially in places like college towns where they might be taking night classes and things of that nature, offering up some sort of a dynamic scheduling capability to even a small group of people can, again, really improve their motivation. It can also help you to improve service levels because it allows you to, based on your forecast, based on the forecast that you created, to slot people into the places that you need them the most. From a dynamic availability perspective, where we're really talking about part-time agents and remote agents, any organization, regardless of size, could take advantage of that. If you have a 20-seat contact center, but you could add even 2 remote folks that can log in and take calls during those peak times or during those times where you're maybe a little bit understaffed, dynamic scheduling and dynamic availability can make a huge difference for you from a service level perspective and to help you maintain consistency. So I absolutely think even smaller contact centers can take advantage of this. It's all a matter of looking at your particular organization and finding the way that it works for you.
Yeah, I'm going to chime in because it reminded me of something I had said earlier. It doesn't have to, when I say change your mindset, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. And I know Collaborate, you guys can do this, that you can just have some of them and even a large group that can utilize that feature and still have the traditional form of scheduling alongside, correct?
Absolutely correct. Yeah.
So, but it's changing of the mindset. But no, I think that what's funny is it more typical to not have the whole contact center be that way than have a piece, and then also be able to use that as a reward for the best performing agents, for example.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree with that, and it's a great technique for motivating folks.
Next question. It's kind of aimed at both of you, so Nancy, we'll let you go first. This has to do with web chat security. The question reads, there's a lot of limitations with what information we can share via web chat due to security. What are your thoughts around this?
Absolutely. When I get excited about the chat features, it's because I think that along with any new technology that we implement, it's always been this way. You have to work out the bugs and you have to work out the issues. And even talking about the cloud, we still have resistance to moving to the cloud because people think that there are security issues, but a lot of those have been worked out. So, yeah, and depending upon the industry, I have even seen banks that are talking about doing this, so they are working through them. So don't let it be off-putting. You might have to wait, depending upon your industry, to see what solution providers come out with as a way of making sure that it's secure, but definitely still look at it.
Yep.
Brad, any comments there?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree with Nancy. It's one of these situations where, again, based on particular industry that you're in, you're going to be adapting these types of technologies as they make sense to you. If you're in the financial industry, if you're in the healthcare industry, even to a lot of extent, if you're in the education industry, there is, or government, for example, these are, of course, going to be the last places to adopt these types of technologies. But ultimately, once the security, once everybody is really comfortable with the security, and I really couldn't agree with Nancy more that we really have worked out most of these security issues at this point. But there's still a mentality that having everything, a person talking to another person on a hard phone is the most secure way we can do things. And the reality is that that's simply not true. We can. The cloud technologies, the voice over IP technology is incredibly secure. In a lot of cases, cloud is even more secure than an on-premise environment. But the key thing is, again, to look at your particular industry and find out what works best for you. Analytics is a great tool if we're dealing with type of written communications and things of that nature, to be able to look for non-compliance. So if you are going down that route, the one suggestion that I would have is have some way to analyze it, right? Have some way to data mine those communications to find instances where your agents are not in compliance and try to address those things proactively and coach proactively so that you don't actually run into issues down the road from a regulatory perspective.
Sure.
Hey, I have something else to add. Something I harped on for years is this whole concept of cross-organizational support. And when you're looking at implementing Omnichannel or even going the next step to digital transformation, you have to have the plan and you have to understand how those channels are going to fit in. So even if you don't think that you're going to do anything with chats or bots now, got to look at it because the plan may not be for 4 years, but it has to be in the plan.
Makes sense. Here's a millennial question. Not sure who wants to tackle it first, but it says, millennials now have a certain expectation when going through the hiring process. Do you think modernizing the HR side of the business will positively impact agents' experience and drive down turnover?
Oh, yeah. But that would be a different webinar because there are some tools out there to automate the process and give better feedback to people who are in queue, to be hired, which talks to the millennial experience because they want feedback and they need feedback right away. But I'm not going to talk about somebody else's product. It's not a competing product, but I'm just not going to bring it up. But yes, definitely, because that's that big cost factor. Hiring is a huge cost factor. So why not improve it so that you get the better agents in there in the first place?
Absolutely, and I just echoing what Nancy is saying, but I absolutely agree. HR, we are absolutely finding that HR has a huge impact on employee retention, right? And this goes beyond contact centers, right? This is for everyone. And so the way that we communicate with people from an HR perspective, they expect, to Nancy's point, they expect timely feedback. You know, they are taking the time to apply for a position within your organization, taking the time out to talk to you. It's frankly, it's a matter of respect to make sure that we're getting back to them in a timely way. And you know, there are obviously technologies out there that can help you with that. As well as just, again, better understanding of the folks that you're actually interviewing and talking to and of course, hiring.
Brad, this one seems to be in your bailiwick. How do you predict call scoring? What are you measuring?
That is an excellent question. So obviously there are much smarter people than me that developed all of this technology. But in layman's terms, and again, I'm the layman here. So the way it was described to me is essentially our technology. We have a learning engine, a machine learning engine that looks at historical evaluations. So evaluations that have been scored manually by a quality assurance person or supervisor. And we start to categorize those things, and we look at our high scoring evaluations, and we look at all of the content that's contained within those recordings. So we look at the speech analytics data, what words and phrases were said within that, what was the emotional content of those calls. We look at the desktop analytics and uncover what the agent was actually doing while they were on that call. We look at, again, speech energy. Was there talk over? Was there silence on the call? Did the agent put the caller on hold for an extended period of time? And we start to categorize these things, and the engine learns what are the characteristics that make for a high-scoring call, and what are the characteristics that lead to a low-scoring call, and everything in between. So essentially, once you start feeding it your manual evaluations, the learning engine at that point takes over and categorizes the calls, and essentially then uses that information to predict for 100% of your calls what the predicted score would be. So it's really simple to implement. You simply have to feed it some evaluations. Obviously, the more evaluations you give it, the more accurate your predictions are going to be. Our machine learning scientists tell us it's about 1,000 calls before you start to get a really accurate prediction. But it will start predicting evaluation scores immediately. But once you get to about 1,000 evaluations that you fed it, you start to get really accurate predictions of what leads to those high-scoring calls and what leads to those low-scoring calls, and again, everything in between. So it's a really impressive technology, and we've seen some great results for those folks that have implemented it.
Great. You know, we're going to tackle gamification in the next 3 minutes here because we're going to be up against it. I think we've got 3 or 4 questions all tied around this. So if you would allow me to read through these, and then Nancy, you can jump in first. The one question says, can I get more information on gamification? And a dovetail to that is there a demo for it? With a lot of companies using the strategy of gamification, is there data around what particular strategy for gamification works best? Meaning, is there a best practice? And then lastly, should rewards be tied to gamification? So I know that's a lot, but Nancy, why don't you tackle it first?
Well, I'm only going to say one thing. Of course, rewards should be tied to gamification because everyone likes being rewarded. But those other questions are really more Brad's questions, especially the demo and all of that. So I'm just going to punt it all on over to you, Brad.
Oh, absolutely. So, first of all, let's talk about the technology behind gamification. So, absolutely. We at Calabrio, we do have some gamification applications built into our product to help you with gamification. And if you are interested in a demo of that, absolutely. If you contact us at Calabrio, we have our contact information at the end of this presentation. Please reach out to us, and we would be happy to arrange a demonstration of how that technology works. The beauty of gamification, though, in my perspective is, and this will sound odd coming from somebody who works for a software company, but you don't necessarily need technology to implement gamification. When I was talking to my clients at the C3 conference, most of them were doing gamification completely outside of any sort of a solution. They had leaderboards that they threw up on their bulletin board. Usually they were paper little charts that they were doing to track people's progress. And it might honestly a lot. This is the thing that kind of sometimes throws people off of gamification. They think it's a little grade school, but the reality is this stuff's tremendously motivating, and it really helps to keep people on track for performance management. So
it works for me.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the takeaway is it doesn't have to be sophisticated. You can start modestly. Is that a good best practice?
That is absolutely what I'd recommend. Absolutely. I mean, and again, if you're lucky enough to have technology, again, please take advantage of that. We as software companies, we put a lot of time and effort into designing this stuff, and it works really well. But you don't have to make it more complicated than it needs to be. It really is just about monitoring people and giving them rewards, whether they are, again, it could be some actual tangible reward, or it could just be a little ribbon that they get, right, for making some sort of an achievement. But keep it simple, and you'll be amazed at the results that you'll see.
Do you have to make it fun?
Absolutely.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. It goes a lot to culture and the impact it can have. Brad, just two quick thoughts on this. The question's also reading, are there demos available for dynamic scheduling and/or analytics? And I'm assuming the answer is yes to both.
Absolutely. We have a whole team of folks that are just dying to show people our technology. So please reach out, and we'd be happy to set something up for anybody that's interested.
Great. And I also want to mention here as we wrap up, on the attachment button, there is you can download a recent report sponsored by Calabrio entitled The Future of the Contact Center. I'm assuming there's a lot of nuggets in there that the report will provide as an opportunity to learn about some of the biggest trends that will impact your contact center and lead you more towards success. So we encourage you to download that as well. We'll wrap it up. Let me remind our audience here and to encourage you to share the webcast. We'll be giving you the webcast link here momentarily via email. And you can also share your thoughts, perspectives, and any additional questions on Twitter. There's Nancy's handle there and Calabrio's. Loop us in if you'd like at CC&G Network. So we'll wrap it up there. Nancy and Brad, thank you both for taking time with us today and walking us through a whole lot of content. There are certain focus areas that continually are brought up. We at CC&G get a chance to meet with people on a pretty regular basis, and we're hearing what's on their minds, and you guys cover a tremendous amount of what is topical. So thank you all. Thank the audience, and everyone have a safe and happy holiday and New Year.
This live webcast has now finished. Thank you for taking part. A recorded version of this webcast will be available on this Bright Talk channel shortly. Please rate this presentation and provide the speaker with feedback using the ratings button. Also remember to share this webcast with anyone you think should see it using the share button. Today's presentation was brought to you by Bright Talk. As a Bright Talk user, you can find many more engaging webcasts to view at brighttalk.com. You can also manage your personal channel subscriptions, your profile details, and start a webcast channel of your own. If you have any comments or feedback on this viewing experience, please let us know by visiting www.brighttalk.com/feedback.